I'm Alexa Donne, and today I'm going to be telling my agent story. This isn't a typical how I got my agent video, because I've actually had more than one agent. My current agent is my second literary agent. When you sign with an agent and it doesn't work out, you feel like you're completely alone. But the thing is, it's happening more and more lately. I know a lot of authors who have had 2, 3, even 4 agents, though I'd say most commonly among my peers who have had an agent before, they're with their second agent now, just like I am. I'm going to tell you my whole agent story from start to finish. From 2013, when I first finished a book and got an agent, to 2017, when I'm with my second agent and I just got a book deal. In 2013, I finished my first novel, which was a YA time travel. I applied to and was thrilled to be accepted to Pitch Madness, where I worked with the wonderful Brenda Drake to polish my query and my first page. And during Pitch Madness, I got several agent requests. I didn't end up with an agent from Pitch Madness, but that contest was essential for me in terms of setting a benchmark deadline for revising my first draft after I had finished it. Shortly after Pitch Madness, I decided to also enter the writer's voice. It had been a few months since Pitch Madness, and it didn't look like those requests were going to turn into an offer. So I applied and again was incredibly lucky to be selected. I was actually the last team member selected for Team Krista. Just like Brenda, Krista was amazing as a mentor. She helped me polish my query again, giving it that extra zing, and she took a look at my opening chapter. Team Krista actually won the Writer's Voice that year, and I only got 2 requests, but one of those requests was from an agent that I ended up really clicking with. She read my manuscript in just 2 weeks, we jumped on a phone call, and here's the thing, it wasn't the call. And this is when I learned that sometimes an agent can ask for a phone call, and it's actually a revise and resubmit conversation. I talked to this agent for over an hour, and she really got my book. She had ideas for revision that were in line with things that I was open to doing and happy to do. I actually ended up working on a series of revisions with her over that summer. So it was between June and September. I will say that doing 3 rounds of revision with an agent before an offer is a bit unusual, but that's what I ended up doing before this agent offered. I got an offer in October and I was over the moon. Because we'd done 3 rounds of revision, I was essentially ready to go on submission. We went on submission in January of 2014, and I was on sub for a little over a year. And sub is hard, guys. Sub is torturous and terrible, but my agent was fantastic through the whole process. She kept in touch with me regularly. I never went more than 2 weeks without hearing from her. She was nudging on a regular basis, and we had responses coming in at a steady clip. Alas, they were all rejections. While I was on submission with my first book, I started working on a second book. I worked on that book for a little over a year, and it ended up that by the time we were ready to pull my first book from submission, my second draft was ready for my agent to read. Now here is the slightly sad part, and I'm going to real talk you through this. And I want to share my agent experience, especially and particularly my first experience that didn't end up working out, because it's really completely normal. Sometimes you'll gel with an agent on one book, but that doesn't mean that you're going to be a fit forever. Everyone wants to have a career relationship with their agent, especially their first agent, but if it doesn't work out, you're going to be okay. My agent read my second book, and it just wasn't exactly what she was looking for. Remember, I signed with an agent on my first novel, and I feel incredibly lucky that that happened to me. But it was my first novel, and every time we write a book, we learn a little bit more about writing books, and we start to ease into our own style and interests. And I'd say my second book was pretty different from my first. You could describe my first as contemporary with a twist. It was time travel, but it was very grounded in a contemporary high school setting. Whereas my second book was more or less straight up urban fantasy. Now, if you pay attention to market trends, you might be going, urban fantasy is a really hard sell in the YA market, and you would be correct, especially in 2015. There's been actually some sales recently of urban fantasy YA, and I am incredibly excited that that trend might be coming back because urban fantasy is one of my favorite genres. But it can be difficult to place in YA. Specifically, I did the thing that you're really not supposed to do, and I wrote in a dead trope. I wrote in a dead trope because I love it. I wrote a book with teens with superpowers, though I called them abilities and not superpowers, but it's a tough sell. And right there, I'd like to point out that my first 2 books were in tough to sell genres. Time travel and superpowers. But the thing was, I loved writing those books, and I still love those books, even though they didn't go anywhere. Write the books that you want to write and that you love to write, and just stay pragmatic about the pathways that those books might take. Writing those 2 books taught me a lot about myself as a writer, a plotter, a developer of characters and twists, and they all paved the path for me to write my 3rd book. But before we get there, so my first agent just wasn't sure what to do with this book. I, of course, really hoped to put it on submission and give it a go. We worked on a round of revisions on it to see if I could get it to a place where my agent was comfortable, and then we decided to part amicably because we just weren't seeing eye to eye. Here's the thing, you're going to hear a lot about parting amicably with your agent. Everyone says it, and it's not always true, but I feel so privileged that it is 100% true in my case. I had a wonderful working relationship with my first agent, but my career and her career and fit and style were just going in different directions. So then I was a free agent. It's the fall of 2015 and I have an urban fantasy YA, and I will tell you, I queried it and I face planted hard. It was a complete 180 from my experience querying my first novel, the YA time travel. I had a pretty good request rate on that. A lot of full requests or partial requests bumped up to fulls. But on the second book, there were crickets for a long time in my email inbox. I got a few requests, but they didn't pan out. October 2015 was a dark time for me. I'd been querying the second book for 2 months, and even when you split amicably with your agent, it is hard and you feel emotionally raw. It's just like any breakup, like breaking up with a boyfriend or a friend. It's hard and you gaslight yourself because you're like, maybe if I tried harder, it would have worked. And there's also the panic. Once you're agented, the idea of no longer being agented and going back into the pool of querying writers is absolutely terrifying. There's also the aspect of saving face. Everyone knew that I had an agent, and then I suddenly didn't have an agent. I didn't announce it, I kept it on the DL, and I was of course really hopeful that that second book would go out into querying and get agented really fast. But it was not meant to be. But the story has a happy ending, I am happy to tell you. So it's late October 2015, and I was down in the dumps. I had those moments where I was thinking of giving up, like if this second book that I poured 1.5 years of my life into wasn't going to work, would it ever work? I thought it was a great book. I thought it was the book of my heart and the book that I wanted to debut with, but nobody wanted it. I said all sorts of pessimistic things to my poor critique partners who stuck by me through it. I'd like to say thank you to Heather Kaczynski and Ellie Blake for not smacking me upside the head while I was complaining. I love you. I'd also like to thank Mary Elizabeth Summer, another critique partner, who said to me on November 1st, Alexa, I think you should do NaNoWriMo. And I said to her, no, Mary Elizabeth, I am ready to give up. I have nothing to write. There's no book I want to write. I am sad. And then on November 3rd, I decided to write my FU publishing book. My FU book is what I called it. And that book was Jane Eyre in Space. Funnily enough, I had thought of the concept for Jane Eyre in Space almost 2 years before, in late 2013. But at the time when I was choosing my second project, I felt that I wasn't ready to write it yet. I had this idea in my head that Jane Eyre in Space would be this beautiful literary YA novel, and I wasn't a beautiful literary writer. I'd only written one book. That book was pretty commercial, and I felt Jane Eyre in Space would be my literary magnum opus in the future. The reason I call it my FU book is that I said FU publishing, FU personal standards of extreme perfectionism. I'm going to write this book. I'm going to write it for fun, and I'm going to write it the way that comes naturally. Whatever I have to do to get 1,667 words a day during Nano. And once I gave myself that permission to just write the book, it was like magic. I won Nano for the first time. I wrote 50,000 words in a single month, which I had never done before and I haven't done since. And I had a momentum and I kept writing every single day through December and January. And I finished the draft of Jane Eyre in Space in early February. I have to make a horrible confession. I queried Jane Eyre in Space starting in late February. Don't hate me. I did do a revision pass on it, but I'll give you the advice, and so will everyone else, that you shouldn't query a project that you have just finished. But I broke the rules, and I queried it. I was lucky in that it was a miraculously clean draft. I think that's because it was my third book, and I'd learned a lot about my writing process and especially pantsing, and how to keep the prose clean and the story relatively focused, despite the fact that I wrote it from the seat of my pants. Why the rush, you might be asking? Well, the truth is, I felt in a rush. I had a feeling that YA sci-fi, especially sci-fi set in space, might be having a moment soon, and I wanted to be ready for it. And once I was about halfway through the book, I knew that this was the new book of my heart, that I couldn't imagine writing or debuting with any other book. This was the one. So I felt I had to get out there and get an agent as soon as possible. So I queried starting in late February, and my query experience on Jane Eyre in Space was the best querying experience that I had yet. So it was my third book that I queried, and my request rate was over 70%. I don't say that to brag, and I know it sounds braggy, but just to say that I knew that this book was the one because the response was so incredibly positive. I got a lot of full requests, and I had a lot of agents reading. Now that said, the querying process for this book had the same ups and downs that you're going to have with any querying process. The first agent to request a full kindly sent a form rejection for it about 3 weeks later. And there is nothing more frustrating than a form rejection on a full. You pull your hair out and you're like, what is wrong with it? Around this time, there was another round of manuscript wishlist on Twitter. That's when agents tweet with the hashtag MSWL, which literally stands for Manuscript Wishlist. And they say what types of books and tropes and things that they're desperate to see in their inbox. I was browsing it one day and I saw a tweet from the agent Elana Roth Parker. I was a real skeptic about manuscript wishlist because at this point I'd been browsing the hashtag for over a year over the span of 2 projects, my urban fantasy and my sci-fi, and I had never seen a tweet that was so on the nose that I would get too excited about it. The tweet was broad but specific at the same time. Elana was looking for high-concept YA, and she enjoyed sci-fi twists, which was my book in a nutshell. So I decided to query her, and that decision basically changed my life. I queried Elana in late February, and I didn't hear from her right away. She responded about 3 weeks later, but she requested a full. And that's a note to you that just because you don't hear from an agent immediately doesn't mean you won't end up getting an offer. Immediate and fast interest doesn't always indicate a happy ending. Publishing success stories come at all different speeds. In late March, I got an offer from a different agent. Cue dancing around my apartment, being over the moon. I notified all of the agents who still had my partial, full, or my query that I had an offer on the table. Elana acknowledged receipt of my email and said that she would read it as soon as possible. That weekend, I was going to WonderCon, and so I can tell you exactly where I was when I got the most magical email. I was walking the vendor hall floor, and I get an email from Elana that says she's about halfway done with my book, and she absolutely has to talk to me. It took all my strength not to freak out in public, but I think I did do a little dance, as is my way. We set up a time to talk on Monday, so I got the email on Saturday and then we talked on Monday. The call was amazing. We just hit it off right away. We talked about business. Elana said everything that I was hoping that she was going to say about what she thought about the book, her ideas for revision, her submission plan, her communication style, everything. I knew that Elana was the one. In another video, I'll go in depth about agent fit and the things that I knew that I was looking for and the things that you might want to think about when you're looking for an agent. But needless to say, Elana checked every single box on my list. So with genuine regret, I turned down the other offer, but happily accepted Elana's. And so that is my agent story in a nutshell. And we lived happily ever after. But seriously, I went from having my first agent going on submission, having to shelve that book, writing a second book, parting ways with my agent, shelving the second book, writing a third book, and then finding the perfect fit for me. Someone who got my YA writing style and had a vision for my career in the future. I knew talking to Elana that we would be a fit for a long time, if not forever. And now I'm on the other side of submission, so my second time on submission with my third book, and I got a book deal. Now, the whole submission story, that is a whole other video for another time, because my second submission experience, while it ended incredibly well, it definitely had some bumps. But overall, I am beyond happy with Elana. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe. I have lots more coming, and as I mentioned, I'll talk about submission, agent fit, and how you can find the perfect agent for you. Thank you for watching, and have a great day. Bye!